Hello and thank you for tuning into this screencast. Today we're going to be continuing our discussion on circles. This is for our trigonometry and analytic geometry class that meets during 8th period. And we've been talking the last week or so about circles, so you should be familiar with the equation or the formula that we deal with, x minus h quantity squared plus y minus k quantity squared equals r squared. And that's, again, where we have a center whose coordinates are h and k, and we have a radius of r. All right, so that's a little bit of some review. We've talked about finding the equation when given a graph. We've talked about vice versa. Given an equation, can you give the graph? And then also discussed about completing the square. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on, about the process by which we might take an equation from its general form and put it in standard form that you see before you here, and do a little bit of work with it. What I would like to look at today is a bit of a change in direction just for a moment. We're going to talk about inequalities. Okay, so you guys, way back in Algebra 1, you probably talked about inequalities like y is less than x or y is greater than x. Okay, and if you're talking about inequalities that deal with x and y, you're always going to want to deal with them in the context of an x-axis and a y-axis. Okay, now y is less than x. The way that we would graph out the line y equals x is normally a diagonal line, but one of the things that you guys are going to remember, hopefully, from Algebra 1 is that if you have a strictly less than inequality or a strictly greater than, we call those exclusive inequalities, you're going to want to have a dotted line or a dotted curve. So for both of these, both of these examples, we're going to have a dotted line instead of a solid line. That's because, again, it's an inequality that's strictly less than or strictly greater than. And then for the one on the left here, we're going to shade below. We're going to shade below because its y is less than x. Over here on the right, we're going to shade above because its y is greater than x. A little review from Algebra 1. And similarly, if we had something like y is less than or equal to x squared, right? Or y is greater than or equal to x squared. Again, remember, you're going to have a solid line because it's inclusive. In this case, it's less than or equal to. And in this case, x squared being a parabola, we would be shading, and y is less than means I'm going to be shading below the parabola. If its y is greater than or equal to, in this case, we're going to have a solid parabola, and we would be shading above it. So just, again, a little recap for you here in chart form. If we've got less than, if we've got greater than, those two we're going to have dotted, whereas less than equal to, greater than equal to, we would have a solid line or a solid curve. And then if it's less than equal to, we would normally shade what I'll call below. And then if it's greater than, or if it's greater than equal to, normally speaking, we would shade above. I'm putting those two words in quotes because here in just a little bit, in the context of circles, there's not really going to be a below or above. It's going to be inside or outside. Okay, so inside goes along with this idea of being less than or equal to. And then outside the circle, make a note to that effect, outside the circle will be if it's greater than equal to. Okay, so without further ado, let's get to an actual example that you guys have been dealing with, which would be the equation of a circle. Suppose I've got x minus 1 quantity squared and y plus 2 quantity squared. Let's say I'm going to make this less than, what do you want, 25 maybe, okay? Less than 25. So everything I do regarding this circle is going to be the same that I've taught you guys already. I'm going to find the center and I'm going to find the radius. The only difference is going to be as it pertains to what kind of circle. Should it be solid or dotted? And then where should I shade, since this is an inequality, okay? So our center is going to be at 1, -2, so we'll go down 2, go over to the right 1, down 2. There's our center. It's going to have a radius of 5, so I'm going to go up 3, to the right, 5, 4, 5. You guys are used to doing this, hopefully. 3, 4, 5. And you want to try to make your tick marks 1, 2, 3, 4 as equidistant as possible so that you can have a nice round circle instead of a, kind of an oval type shape. Now, given that this is less than, again, as I said a minute ago, you want to make a dotted curve instead of a solid curve. All right. There we go. That's not too bad. And then it's less than, so we're going to shade inside. But I always tell guys, if you're confused or if you're not sure where to shade, just plug in a little test point. And here, the test point that we would plug in actually with the greatest of ease would be this center point. Okay, so if I plug in x equals 1, what's 1 minus 1 quantity squared? Well, that's 0. And if I plug in -2, what's -2 plus 2 quantity squared? Right? That also is 0. And so 0 plus 0 on that left-hand side is indeed less than 25. So that's a true statement. We want to shade over the region where we're getting a true statement. Okay? So we would shade inside the circle. Again, you can go back to that chart and just remember that if it's less than, equal to, you're going to shade inside the curve. Or you could always just pick a test point. Okay? Let's do one more example, and then the lesson will kind of shift gears back to the homework. Suppose I give you x squared plus y squared, and I say is greater than or equal to, let's do 9, okay? Now, some of you guys asked a really good question in class the other day. You said, Coach, I don't see anything inside of parentheses. Well, that's just like as though there's a 0 there, isn't it? Okay, so x squared is the same thing as x minus 0 squared, and y squared is the same thing as y minus 0 squared, okay? So make a note to that effect that, if I don't see anything going along with that x squared, it's just assumed to be 0. So here, this one, the center is going to be where? At the origin, okay? And then I'm going to go 3 to the right because that 9 is my radius squared. That means the radius is 3. I'm going to go 3 left, 3 up, and 3 down. In this case, I'm going to use a solid curve because it's including, it's greater than or equal to, okay? So I'm going to do a solid curve. And again, if I got my tick marks equidistant, then my curvature will look somewhat decent. And the only other question now is, where should I shade? Should I shade inside or outside? This one's greater than, so we're definitely going to shade on the outside. So that means that we will cover all that region that's outside of the curve. And again, you can pick a test point. The origin's a nice test point to pick on this one. If I plugged in x equals 0 on the left and y equals 0 on the left, then that's like saying 0 is greater than or equal to 9, which is not true. So I should not shade over the origin, should not shade over my center. The last thing we'll talk about in this screencast, and now I'm at about 8 minutes now, is a question from y'all's homework. Okay, I got homework 4.1 on Delta Math is put together for you guys to kind of help you practice this process of completing the square. You'll remember, if I go back to my notes from the previous page, not every circle is going to start out, in this nice, neat formula. Okay, sometimes you might get, as an example, you might get x squared plus y squared plus 6x minus 8y minus 11 equals 0. You might get something like that. I think that was a problem that we saw earlier in the week. Okay, and you've got to know what to do to get it from that general form into what we're calling our standard form, where we can cherry pick out the center and the radius. Okay, and that process by which we do that is called completing the square. You and I have talked about it. We had a Kahoot, as a matter of fact, where we said, have your little blank right there and know what to put in that blank. Okay, so the question to be answered for you guys is, what goes in the blank? That's where you're practicing on this homework. That's the only thing you're going to be asked about, is completing the square. So let's look at this example. I pulled this from somebody's, I forget who it was, but their current problem that they're working on. And your first step ought to be to get that 4x to the other side. Okay, and to get that 45 to the other side. So these two guys are they're just going to swap spots. Okay, so I'm going to put the 45 on the right and the 4x on the left. And then I'll have my little blank right there, and I'll ask the question, okay, what should go in that blank right there? All right, and you guys know I do my goofy little ching, little, you can't see me at home, but the little hand signal thing. And so we're going to take that 4, we're going to cut it in half, 4 cut in half, and then we're going to square that result. 2 squared is 4, so we're going to say plus 4 on the right as well as on the left. Now all they're asking for here is to solve the equation. And so if we factor this out, I'm going to take this a step further now. If we factor this out, it's going to be x, because you split it up as x times x, right? 2, split it up as 2 times 2, and then that minus sign in the middle. So we're going to have, and I'll scoot it down a little bit, give myself some more room. That left-hand side is going to factor out as x minus 2 quantity squared. And then what's 45 plus 4? That's going to be 49. And so our last step, this is again a little bit of some algebra, our last step would be to take the square root of both sides, okay, to get x minus 2 by itself, because taking the square root of a squared is an inverse operation. And you'll say, well, what's the square root of 49? It's going to be 7, but we'll say plus or minus 7 because there has to be two answers. And at that point, you would split it up and you'd say, okay, well, if x minus 2 equals a positive 7, my answer would be 9. And then if x minus 2 equaled negative 7, my answer would be negative 5. All right, so those would be my two answers. And that would be how I would type in my two answers from Delta Math. Actually, I don't know if I've got this pulled up still. Let's see here. Yep. So you could type in your answer, x equals, I've already forgotten what it was, 9 or negative 5. And again, if you want to enter in two answers, just hit the plus sign. X equals 9. And actually, don't say x equals 9. Pardon me. Let's say 9. And then let's say negative 5, because I don't think they like it when you put in x equals. So what do we have? 9 and negative 5. I think I like that. And then we hit yes. And then they're going to walk you through that process that you and I just talked about, where you move the 4x over, you move the 45 over, you complete the square. Look here in green where they've added it to both sides. You factor it out, and then you take the square root of both sides. They are literally just taking you step by step through what we just went through in our brief little explanation. And then the hard part here would probably be to say, you know, what is this plus or minus sign? I think just split it. Just say, you know, instead of looking at it as 2 plus or minus 7, just say 2 plus 7, 2 minus 7, split it up into two things, and then get your two answers that way. All right. I hope this makes sense. I hope this helps you complete the homework. Appreciate your time in watching this screencast, and please make sure you spend the rest of our class time working on homework 4.1, and you can let me know if you have any questions. I'll talk to you guys again tomorrow. Thanks.